Welcome to What's in a Game. On today's show, with just 21 days left until NBA opening night, Denver Nuggets training camp is finally underway. The narrative tone of the season is being set, but who is the focal point of the conversation around Denver? Stay tuned to find out. Welcome back to What's in a Game. I'm Grace Jean, here with a brand new friend of the show, Denver Nuggets beat writer for the Denver Post and host of the Nuggets Inc. podcast, Bennett Durando. How are you doing today?
I am doing pretty great. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on, guys. It's fun, busy time of the year. Getting out to San Diego today, getting everything sort of into gear with training camp and sort of the regularity of having media around the team again for the first time in a few months.
Yeah, for sure. And you're out there in San Diego with the team. You just got back from the post practice media session as well. We might hit on a couple of those quotes that came out today on top of the media day stuff. But in reference to the kind of season getting back on back into the swing of things. For you as a beat writer, is it really just like a switch, or is there like a ramp up period before, now? Or is this the ramp up period? Because obviously once the actual season starts, you're writing every single day about everything. You're traveling sometimes with the team, et cetera, et cetera.
There's a little bit of a ramp up before now. This is still part of the ramp up. We get ready with season preview coverage, a lot of that sort of stuff. But you also jump into, just sort of daily coverage of opportunities to talk to players and coaches again and everything. So, I was working off and on for the last few weeks before media day and training camp, mostly off, I guess, which is for the best because it's a good recharge period, but you do sort of jump back into the swing of it, just from a being around the team standpoint, like pretty aggressively, I guess, with media day as the starting point.
Right. Because media day is just like, here's everything, right?
Yeah, it's really
all right.
It's the very first day.
Yeah, it's like the first day of school, right? All right, before we jump into the meat of our discussion, please do us a favor, hit the like and subscribe buttons. Really helps us out with the algorithm as we try to grow the channel. Bennett, I want to start with a little bit about you, just so our audience can have an opportunity to know a little bit more about you and your background. So, what's your story? How did you get into sports writing? How did you become a Denver Nuggets beat writer for the Denver Post specifically? I believe you are the successor to Mike Singer in that particular role. I remember the sort of handoff. I'm like, oh, I was following Mike Singer, and he's like, hey, Bennett's doing this now, and that's how I started following you. So, can you tell us a little bit about the backstory there?
Yeah, well, as far as how I got into sports writing, coach's son, I guess. I've had family in, newspaper. Both parents worked for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch not anymore, but so I kind of grew up around it a little bit in that regard, but also developed my own independent interest in doing it as a career myself, I guess, because, unlike, maybe being an actual coach's son or whatever, the case may be like in the league, the jokes are kind of like, don't go into this with people who are reporters at
I can imagine
newspapers. It's not the most financially viable industry, as everyone kind of already knows without me telling them that. So I kind of grew up with a lot of jokes about that, but enjoyed it enough anyways that, it's just what I ended up doing. So I grew up in Missouri, went to school at Missouri, decent J school, good in-state tuition, MIZ. covered some SEC sports out of college. In addition to Mizzou, I went to Auburn, Alabama, and had my first full-time job there for a couple of years covering.
We've got some Auburn fans in my group chat that will be happy to hear that.
Yeah, crazy time for them right now with BP retiring, but so yeah, I covered Auburn sports for a couple of years, then got hired at the Denver Post to cover the Avalanche. Didn't really know much about hockey, but wanted to give it a shot, wanted to live in Denver close to the mountains and have a good sports writing job there with access to cover a lot of different sports, a lot of different leagues, that sort of thing. And then started helping out on Nuggets coverage mostly during the championship run, like during the 2023 playoffs.
Oh, wow. What a time.
Yeah, because the Avalanche, they choked in the first round of the playoffs that year. And so I was
God.
free early on, and Mike Singer was having a child. His wife was having a child. And so I started helping out, went on the road a couple times to Phoenix and LA, and then he was back. And then I just sort of kept helping him through the rest of the run to the finals and everything. And then he left the paper not too long. So I switched beats full time. I hope I didn't just lose you. I think the screen buffer.
Oh no, you're all good. You're all good. My Wi-Fi is just kind of in and out, but okay. I heard you. Yeah. So that's definitely a tale. You mostly was it mostly basketball then when you were doing stuff at Missouri and then covering SEC stuff with Auburn as well, or what were you covering other sports also, and that's kind of what gave you, I guess, the confidence to even try hockey later?
Well, the variety is definitely what gave me the confidence to give it a shot on the NHL beat, because I think my first beat at like the campus paper at Missouri was Mizzou wrestling. I did not know much about that either. I think I had Wrestling for Dummies, the book, to help me out with that.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, but the main, appealing sports as far as the most traffic, the largest fan bases are generally the revenue sports, basketball, football. So I covered a lot of that at Missouri, and then in Auburn as well. So, so, Konzo Martin years of Mizzou basketball, some Bruce Pearl hoops in Auburn, and then, covering the NBA was always sort of like
a goal,
great opportunity if it could ever come up. And so, part of the, I don't know about calculus, I guess, of moving to Denver, but like there were opportunities to fill in and help out here and there. And then I don't know if I predicted or could have predicted that it would become a full-time opportunity to be on the NBA beat for the paper the way it did, but it's been a lot of fun.
So we've got a real life journalist with the journalist background on the show, which is a first. We've had other journalists on the show who don't necessarily have a traditional journalism background. I guess you and Jamal Murray are the closest that we've gotten in terms of like the sort of journalism pedigree, I suppose. But as somebody who has that sort of background, and you've been covering the team for the last 2 years now, basically, a little over 2 years, do you consider yourself a fan of the Nuggets? And if not, who is your team, your NBA team?
Don't have a team. I'm not at all a fan of the Nuggets, and not a fan of anyone else. It would be, I'm, expected to be, sort of divorced from fandom as much as possible in the specific, league or space that I cover. So, it doesn't mean I'm a Nuggets hater either. I just, it's the job description to be objective and unbiased and everything. It doesn't mean I'm ever rooting against them or anything like that. I guess the one old adage for a lot of sports writers is that you should root for whatever is best for you selfishly. It's a really good story that could be dependent on a certain sort of outcome, whatever it may be. So, hopefully that doesn't outrage too many fans, I guess. But
oh no, you've made a ton of enemies with that answer for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, at least you're not like other friend of the show, Matt Moore, who goes out of his way to antagonize every fan base under the sun.
But that's why we love Matt. So
that is why we love Matt. That is why.
When I see him antagonizing someone online, it makes me feel warm and fuzzy.
That's such a writer thing to say.
Yeah.
All right. Before we jump into the specifics of Denver Nuggets Media Day, I wanted to touch on some of the big running themes, because there were definitely some, beats that felt like 75% to 100% of everybody who talked yesterday hit on, right? And so but before that, I want to ask you, from your perspective now, having covered this team for a couple of years, you covered the Avs before that. And I don't know how extensive sort of media days are when it comes to college sports, but what is the purpose of media day? And have you found that it differs across teams, across sports, or even like across years, like within the same, like for the same team? And then being in the room for, at least two now 3 consecutive media days, right?
Yeah. Yep.
How was this Nuggets Media Day different than the other 2 that you've covered? Or did it feel the same in terms of, like, again, that sort of ephemeral, like, what was the sentiment in the room?
Well, I wish I could tell you it felt totally different from last year, and the atmosphere was just completely more positive or whatever. And maybe it was, but to a certain extent, all of these media days are pretty well groomed and well prepared.
Mm-hmm. Nobody's coming out and like saying crazy stuff like, man, I hate this team.
Yeah, like usually there has to be like a pretty openly adversarial situation between a player and a team or something for there to be like an obviously immediately negative tenor to a media day. Like generally players, coaches are going to put on a good face and be optimistic about what is ahead. I think if you went back and looked at quotes from Nuggets Media Day last year, even though I think everyone will look back on that season as one of sort of, pent up frustration and everything, a lot of the quotes from that day were probably still very enthusiastic and very hopeful. And I specifically recall Aaron Gordon really hyping up the Dario Saric edition. And, we
talked about that.
People will find things to be fired up about and to exaggerate about a little bit. So, all 4 newcomers to this roster could very well turn out to be incredible contributors. And maybe this team is a 60-win juggernaut and wins the championship. But regardless of how they end up performing, obviously, everyone's going to act excited about them. I do think everyone's genuinely excited around the team. That being said, like, on or off the record, like coaches, front office, everyone feels pretty good about the moves they made. And I think there's a pretty solid energy around the team. I just don't know if that specifically makes media day way different from how it would be otherwise, if that makes sense. As for your other question, media days aren't my favorite thing ever, to be honest, despite being named in our honor. It's just a little more formal. It's a little more dressed up. It makes sense, obviously,
Right.
as kind of an introduction for teams and to sort of have certain messages out. It's good from a transparency standpoint in the NBA to pretty much roll out every player.
All right, give me 1 second. This dog just crawled into the room.
Oh, wow. If I were at home right now, I'm sure I would have cat problems with this live stream, but I am not. So
sorry about that. Continue on.
No, you're fine. But like in college football, there's a whole conference-wide media days event, and it's kind of a headache, honestly. And there's a huge, huge room with a podium that every SEC football coach will go up and stand at, and it's like a political State of the Union address, almost, with the way that they like have prepared remarks and everything. So this is a little less extreme than that. Like, they just threw a table together in the practice court at Ball Arena for Nuggets, but it's a more, in theory, formal environment for a media availability, as opposed to some of the more casual atmospheres that you get to talk to players and coaches in throughout the season.
Yeah, it's very buttoned up for sure. And honestly, from this media day in particular, I felt had, and I'm trying to separate this from my experience as a fan of the team who talks about the team on a podcast. I felt like there was a lot less for me to like dissect than, especially last year, but even, years past. I didn't have a podcast in years past, so I also wasn't, digging into things quite as deeply as I did last season. But it just felt like, okay, here are the points. There's like very, very little deviating from these running themes about player accountability, about Jamal in particular taking ownership of the team and being a leader, about Jokic doing the same thing, et cetera, et cetera. And for that reason, I'm going to group our discussion into like, buckets of various media availabilities. And I thought in terms of like, who actually taught me something new about what this team's going to look like this year or the goals of the team. It was really just David Adelman for me, because he actually digs in. He's the one who got really the most specific questions about what, X's and O's wise are going to be different for the team. And that kind of makes sense because he is the new head coach, of course. But it honestly felt like I didn't learn too much new, or even too much that makes me want to overthink things about the team. And maybe that is, for me as a fan of the team, has more to do with the fact that I just feel a lot less anxiety about this current roster configuration than I had in years past, with respect to the ultimate goal of winning a championship. But on that note, let's jump into our first segment, which is about the main dudes here. I've got in my notes Ben Tenzer and John Wallace, Jokic, Jamal, and then the grouping of Christian and AG, which I thought was interesting. AG has kind of gone back and forth between being by himself or with somebody else over the last few years at his media day. And I'm not actually reading too much into that, because I think it just has to do with like taking turns with all the other stuff that they have to do on media day, which is producing all those like short, funny clips that the team puts out throughout the year.
Yeah,
all right, let's talk
about
Ben Wallace first. Yeah, like none at all, except I mean, last year we had the whole like Malone and Booth didn't do a thing together, but this year, you know, David Adelman didn't do his media availability with Ben Tenzer and John Wallace either. Then again, that's 3 dudes, so they've got a bit of an excuse. Maybe those 3. Maybe Adelman hates those guys. We have no idea. But
I think all is well.
Wallace. Yeah. I want to start with Ben Wallace, and I'm going to keep calling them that because they do almost everything together in terms of their media appearances. They kind of remind me a little bit of like a more positive version of the Delightful Children from Down the Lane for anybody who watched Codename Kids Next Door. Will, if you could bring up the first clip that I've got the 2 focal points clip here.
I basically want to.
So we'll just let this one play, and then I'll
follow up
on that.
Same idea with Nikola. I mean, obviously he's the centerpiece of this organization or this team. Is it beyond open door with him? To what extent do you consult with him before you make major moves? I mean, is it on a need-to-know basis, or do you have active conversations? Where in that scope does it fall?
No, absolutely. I mean, having a good pulse on what the team is doing, what's happening behind closed doors, in and out of the locker room, I think plays a major part in that. Being able to talk to Nikola, being able to talk to Jamal as being the 2 kind of focal points of our organization. You know, we told them to be brutally honest with us. You know, what do they need from us? What do they need moving forward? Like I said, we addressed those issues. I mean, and now we got to put it together.
I think it's important to understand that, you know, they have such a unique perspective in this, so it would be crazy to not ask for their perspectives and opinions.
So this clip I found really interesting because the first thing that jumped out to me was how John Wallace. I keep wanting to call each of them Ben Wallace. John Wallace called Nikola and Jamal, quote, the 2 focal points of the organization. That really stood out because it was the first sort of indication of how committed the Nuggets franchise is to Jamal Murray as the number 2 on the team. Grouping him in that conversation with Jokic, I thought was pretty big, to the point where that set my brain off so much that I missed the very next quote. And I'm like, wait, what is everyone else talking about here with these conversations that both John and Ben had with Jokic and Jamal, where they said they told Jamal and Jokic to be, quote, brutally honest with them about what the team needed now and moving forward. And then John goes on to say, we addressed those issues and now we've got to put it together, right? So once I heard that part, I'm like, whoa, we're talking about roster decisions, right? Because what else are you talking to the co-GMs, or, you know, let's get the titles right, Executive Vice President of Player Personnel and Executive Vice President of Basketball Operations in Ben and John, or John and Ben, I think, if you go respectively with those titles. There's no more plausible deniability. You know, oftentimes we get these very vague statements from players about, like, I'm not involved in those decisions. With Jokic, that's above my pay grade, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not a Nugget specific thing. That is throughout the NBA. And for, like, Giannis is, like, I think pretty famous for being like, yeah, I had no idea that they were going to trade Chris Middleton. I'm like, all right, dude. You know, for example, so my question for you here is a little bit of reckless speculation. Is, what do you think the specific issues that Jamal and Jokic raised with Ben and John in those meetings? Because it's clear they happened, and they're, like, at least these 2 are acknowledging that they happened.
Right. Well, I thought the same thing as you, first of all, when he identified Murray as a focal point, and sort of, which, you know, is a far cry from past off seasons and seasons where the Nuggets under Calvin Booth, they explored possible trades involving Jamal Murray at points. So clearly a commitment there from this new front office to him, and sort of an indication that they really care about his voice. I also think it's, not a huge revelation with Jokic, who has sort of become more comfortable with his voice over the last year, at least, I think, as far as the sway that he has, what his comments in the media can do, as well as what he says behind closed doors.
We're actually not going to touch too much on like specific details of Jokic's availability, because I didn't think we actually got that much from him on media day. But even he said yesterday, yeah, I remember saying at the end of the season we needed more depth, and now we have it.
Yes, exactly. So as far as what happened behind those closed doors in those meetings, like Jokic has basically told us already, like from a broad standpoint, that he was telling Kroenke and Wallace and Tenzer that the Nuggets needed more depth. Like at the end of the day, they just needed enough guys to fill out a rotation. And, if Michael Porter was going to end up being the collateral damage of that, just from a contract standpoint, then so be it. He was. As far as specifics, Jokic brought up spacing, post spacing in particular. I think defense is something that in general that probably gets brought up a lot from both him and Murray, who are offensive engines, who are guys who are, paid the money they're paid to score, to create offense, and that ends up sort of being a large ration of their energy. So, and obviously defense is not the greatest skill set for either of them on top of that. So I would pinpoint those two things, just defensive depth and spacing. But, I think from a larger standpoint, it was just the idea that roster changes were needed, not necessarily from a specific means standpoint, but to the ends of having a more versatile, longer rotation. I kind of think that's the main idea there. And here they are, one of the other themes so far from media day and the first day of training camp has been competition as a result of that. Tenzer and Wallace ended up sort of generating with trades and free agency.
Yeah, that is definitely another one of the running themes, and we'll touch on that, especially when it comes to Adelman's comments, because it wasn't just a running theme throughout, like each person that talked at media day about the increased level of competition. Like, what's that word when things go up? Increased level of competition, but also was mentioned throughout Adelman, like multiple times throughout David Adelman's, I think, extended comments. I think he probably had the longest media availability. And
variety of play styles, too. Sorry, just a variety of play styles, too. Like, even today, when he was talking with us after the first practice of training camp, he got asked about sort of just the biggest changes in the NBA in the last year. I think Matt Brooks might have asked. And David, one of the things that he identified was just how Oklahoma City was able to build this team that was able to play any style for any situation. And now, how can you even start to come close to that, just to be able to try some different things when different moments call for it. And so that's part of the depth aspect too, is that maybe they don't have 12 playable guys for every single night, but they might have enough guys to try some different things on night A versus night B and still have 9 to 10 playing on both of those nights, just different combinations.
Yeah. We had a whole our last episode last week was on the various ways that a team can be versatile, and obvious, like the most obvious way is to have enough good players that can kind of play around each other. And that's the next step for this team now. And that was also another running theme for everyone, is like, we got to get in the gym and like figure out how this is actually gonna, fit together. Couple more things from Ben and John. They went to Eurobasket. They saw Jonas. They saw Jokic. They observed basketball. They kind of emphasized. They got the obvious questions about the whole situation with Jonas over the summer and how they had talked to him. I don't think that their comments are particularly like if you thought there was an issue there, I don't know that their comments like helped you that much, because they were basically the same things he said over the summer. Like, we've had nothing but positive, conversations with him. But I think, and we'll address this, what Jonas said at his media availability, I think is probably going to be the most useful there. I was kind of disappointed that nobody asked them what they thought of the Ben Wallace nickname. Not gonna lie, Bennett, you guys gotta get on your game there.
I didn't know that Ben Wallace is what people landed on, if I'm being honest.
Oh, you didn't? Here's the backstory for this, people, is Bennett has been a healthy human being and stayed off of Twitter for the last months, basically, largely. We've been kind of collectively referring to the duo as Ben Wallace.
I think I remember seeing some tweets just sort of about different options. I couldn't even tell some of the other.
There was like 10 Wallace going around. I'm like, that doesn't do it for me. There were specific, Ben 10 was going around for just Ben Tenzer, but I think Ben Wallace that's the one that has so far stuck, at least among the fandom.
Wow.
All right, let's move on to, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say,
just wow.
Hand up. I regret not asking.
I'm still waiting on that one. Maybe the Altitude Radio guys will get to that. They've been pretty good at basically just funneling all the fan questions over to the team over the summer, which is kind of funny. All right, let's move on to Jamal Murray. First observation of him when he sat down was that he looked incredibly tan. I know he's been hanging out with the team in LA. Everybody looked like they'd been tan. Even Christian Brown, I'm like, oh, he's starting to get a bit of that farmer's tan line going on. You could tell. The first question that he got was about what sparked his increased role as a more sort of concrete leader on the team. Will, if you could play the "Just Trying to Win" clip for me here.
Charge. Hey, Jamal, you got a lot of credit from the front office and the coaching staff for leading the charge with organizing workouts and being vocal with the young guys. Just curious what kind of sparked that for you and what that experience was like for you this summer, getting the group together.
Just trying to win a championship.
So there's Jamal Murray, straight from the horse's mouth. He says, I'm just trying to win a championship. It was very, very Jamal Murray, like in the way that he delivered that answer, very kind of terse, classic Jamal. He also said, when you lose, and I don't know if he's referring to just this last year or also the year before, after obviously winning the title in 2023, said when you lose, you try to find some kind of motivation. The front office made some moves and we want to put our best foot forward. There was a lot of, that was another, I didn't think about this as a running theme, but it really was mentioned throughout media day by the players. I'm trying to think if it was only the, players that were already on the team, but even some of the new players too were players that weren't here last year anyway. For example, Bruce Brown, who isn't new, but wasn't here last year, is that the front office made some moves like we have what we need. We want to try to win this thing now. And that sort of putting that providing not pressure, but motivation for going into the season Is that another sense that you got, that like the front office actually making concrete, pretty like big moves this summer to try to improve the roster, being something that gave guys a little extra juice, at least in terms of what they were saying at Media Day?
Yes, I think so. And even beyond that, just the overarching sense of newness, I guess. Like there's kind of a mini era change within the Jokic era going on here, between a new head coach, new front office leadership on top of the that they engineered. So I think just sort of the entirety of all that, obviously a new staff, not just Adelman, but assistant coaches, there's kind of a different spark of energy that kind of stemmed from all that. And I think one of the things that Nuggets leadership was really trying to sort of quietly, prod behind the scenes was just sort of a sense of camaraderie in the off season, like, being organized and having guys get together for workouts somewhere, or, whether it's people in the gym in Denver or just having a pickup run in LA while they're hanging out there and enjoying the sun. Right. Like, so I think the sort of, emphasis on togetherness was very much sort of an undercurrent of this off season, as they were going through a lot of different changes and trying to recalibrate sort of the mood of the organization. And that definitely showed up, sort of manifested through Jamal Murray most on Media Day, for sure. Like, beyond Jamal's comments himself, one of the most interesting takeaways for me was what other people were saying about him, right? Like that, that Adelman made sure to sort of praise the leadership from him, that John Wallace sort of tried to prop him up as much as he could in that regard. So I think sort of the
positive reinforcement.
Yes, the reinforcement surrounding him, I think, was noticeable as much as anything specifically that Jamal said himself.
Yeah, for sure. And he made comments like he's focused on having a good November. I couldn't tell if there was like a hint of sarcasm in that particular comment, just because of, I think by the third time he said it, I'm like, okay, all right, Jamal, we get it.
I think it's I think it's authentic. I think he means that he's trying to have.
I think he means it too, but I feel like by the third time he said it, he was just like speaking to like a specific group of people.
He likes to be a little bit, just like a pinch of snide, undertone to some of what he says. Sometimes it's what makes him an interesting character. So I don't want to like diagnose intent to his comments, but it wouldn't stun me if there was just a little bit of light sarcasm at the haters, as they say, in him sort of acknowledging his early season struggles, which are just an undeniable fact of his career. So
some other comments from Jamal. He said he got specific questions about, what was different for him this particular offseason. I think Adam Mattis was the one who specifically directed him to, you've had various injuries and ailments and like reasons that you had shorter off seasons in, recent years, but this was like a kind of full normal length off season. Jamal answered, I think, in a way that surprised me, because I thought he was going to be more terse in his answer, but he did say like he felt like this off season was an opportunity for him to rest and then get into like quote unquote running shape before training camp, which that was interesting. on ways that he could improve. He said he thinks that the next step for him and Jokic is to translate some of their unspoken communication into words with the rest of the team. I interpreted that as sort of share, like we need to share with the rest of the class a little bit more. Did you take that a little bit differently?
Well, I think part of it too is just like making sure that they are communicating directly with each other about their thoughts on things, like even in the off season, right? Like as much as I just laid out, the theme of togetherness or whatnot, the fact remains that Jokic spends his off seasons in Serbia or wherever Team Serbia takes him. But there's an inherent geographic rift between him and the other, to use Wallace's terminology, focal point of the team during the summers. And so, it's not like they're going to be talking every day necessarily. And I think it's fair of Jamal to sort of point that out. But yeah, just sort of a general transparency with each other, with the rest of the team. They're both pretty private people, but I don't I don't want it to sound like I've portrayed it as though Jokic and Murray have a bad relationship or anything, because they definitely don't. But I think it was just sort of a kind of an open-ended way of him sort of imploring both himself and Jokic to communicate more holistically with each other, with the team, all of that. And it obviously connects back to what Wallace said about wanting the two of them to be brutally honest with the front office.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. It was interesting. I think that Jamal actually had a pretty short availability, but I feel like we got a lot out of it. Maybe just because of how much other people talked about him. Because I feel like I have, of all the players, maybe the best sense of what he's going to be like, maybe outside of, I think, Aaron, or at least what his sort of goal is to start the season. He and Aaron, more than anybody else, in large part because we heard about him from so many other people. He did comment on his other teammates as well. He said that from what he's seen, Cam Johnson dribbles better than Jamal thought he did, which was an interesting comment to me. Talked about Jonas's screen setting as an advantage that stands out to him as something that the team could definitely use. Talked about it being hard to go under his screens, and I think that's largely because of Jonas's knowledge of screening angles and screening and rescreening. Very much looking forward to having a backup center who, can do that. Because I actually thought that DeAndre Jordan did a pretty good job. The other options over the last couple of years, not so much. Yeah, there's nothing else that stood out from Jamal's specific availability. But let's go to the big man on campus, Nikola Jokic. He was asked by one Bennett Durando about the situation with his contract extension. And let's just play the short clip here.
Secondly, you bypassed the chance to sign an extension with the team this summer. Josh Kroenke has said they plan to offer you the full amount available next summer. Do you plan to sign the extension next year?
I mean, I don't think about it. I think those contracts, extensions comes as a reward, as something that is natural to the sport, especially in today's NBA, how you see how the salary cap is growing and everything. So my plan is to be the Nuggets forever. So that's my answer. Nugget forever, or Nuggets never. No.
In terms of one moment at Media Day, this is probably in terms of the impact of what was said here on the short like medium and long-term future of the franchise. This was probably the biggest, where Jokic says, "My plan is to be Nuggets forever." Right? I think that's probably the most talked about single, chunk of media day. Great job asking that question. I was kind of surprised that it took that long into the availability to get to it. Just because Jokic did, decline to sign an extension this summer, and although he has reasonable financial reasons to do so, definitely sparked a little bit of a mini firestorm. Probably, honestly, because it came within 2 weeks that he declined his extension after Josh Kroenke's "we never want to have to trade Jokic" comments that a lot of people took out of the context of second apron talk and all of this stuff. Yeah. Were you surprised that he was this forthcoming? Given that a lot of stars aren't necessarily, especially when he started the answer with kind of, "I don't think about that stuff," but then he was just like, just so you guys stop asking. It's kind of like very Jokic of him to be like, just so you guys stop asking about this. Like, I'm trying to stay here, so like we can stop.
Yeah. Well, he does think about that stuff, so
right.
that's that. I'm going to flag that part of the comment.
Yeah.
I guess I was a little surprised. I wasn't totally sure what to expect in his answer. He likes to play coy. He likes to be, sort of deadpan sarcastic a lot of the times. You never know exactly how he might, what direction he might go tonally with something. But look, he did himself favors by being as definitive as he was, because he's way less likely to be pestered about it by me and or other reporters throughout the season now. So I don't know, maybe he realized mid-answer that it would be good for him to just say what he ended up saying. But yeah, I mean, I guess other than the fact that he was so forthcoming, it wasn't the most surprising thing. The Nuggets have felt supremely confident that he's going to sign next year. It was never a situation.
At least that's what they're projecting, right? Like that's what they're saying. But
no, they are like even obviously they can sit up at a podium and say they're confident, but they are confident. They were confident. Like I don't think they had any ounce of serious doubt about it. So, as much as it's fair to probably draw the connection to Josh Kroenke's slip up with the quote in terms of the speculation that sort of carried out from Jokic declining the extension, I also just think that when a player of his pedigree puts off an extension or does not immediately jump on the opportunity to sign one, like teams are going to get ideas, like especially the big market teams in California. And it's inevitable. I think the Nuggets were sort of ready for some of that, but that's just how it is. Like that's the way that the way that the Earth orbits the sun in the NBA.
Yeah, as the world turns, right? He talked a little bit about Jonas, called him a little bit different version of me. I love Jokic quotes. Said he'll help on the defensive glass and he'll be a bigger threat against small lineups. That's speaking. I think that was Jokic mostly speaking about Jonas being solely on the floor, but we've had some chatter coming out of media day and training camp about potential Twin Towers lineups with the two of them. But I think Jokic is sort of speaking more broadly about the ways that Jonas can help.
I can give you an update.
Please.
I can give you an update because we asked Jokic today about his thoughts on the double big configuration with the two of them. And he said, as Aaron Gordon was walking by to the idea of him and Valunciunas playing together, quote, "Why not? I'm sick of AG. I cannot play with him anymore. So we need to change him. We're not going to change me."
It's nice to have Joker back. He also said on media day that they've got to save Bruce's career again, right?
Yes, great comment. Yeah, he was feeling himself a couple times.
He was like really cracking himself up. I would say.
Which, you know what, is great, because as much as he sort of famously dislikes doing media, if he can find ways to have fun with it, then it is better for everyone involved. It is better for him. It is a more ultimately candid experience for us, and probably, you know, both more entertaining and more insightful for the fans to consume.
Yeah. He complimented Cam's passing and IQ, went on a little bit of an extended short extended discussion on the various ways that he thinks Cam will fit into their system, and how he thinks Cam will become an even better player within their system, because they sort of highlight his versatility because of all the different ways that he'll be used within Denver's offense. Something that he actually said today, I think, out of practice, was we have 12 or 13 really good players, which I got like slight PTSD from Calvin Booth's "we have 9 real guys" comments. Will this come back to haunt us? I don't know. But my second thought was, who are the 1 or 2 guys that Jokic just doesn't count in that accounting of the really good players?
Yeah, that's tough. Someone's catching strays there.
The people need to know someone's catching strays. It might have been somebody that was walking by and he looked right at them. I don't know. But I thought that was interesting. But 12 or 13 really good players sounds pretty good to me. If that comes to pass. There was no one guy, at least so far, like last year, where Dario Saric was the guy that was really being talked up by multiple guys, by Jokic, by AG, as you mentioned, especially AG. There's not one guy that's being like singularly talked up. It's really the conversation right now amongst the team is about the like aggregate depth, I guess, the aggregate talent on the team. And that leads me into the next little chunk we've got here, which is Christian Braun and Aaron Gordon, who did their availability together. And the first comment that stood out to me was from Christian, who said, quote, "Everything everyone in this locker room has wanted, we have. Everything we need is in our locker room right now. Make sure it's a no excuse year." This really stood out to me, and it probably did to everybody in the media room too, because it really is it made me think, one, was last year an excuse year, and how often were the players on the team, whether in like physically in the locker room or outside the locker room, but to each other, talking about what the team was missing last year?
Yeah, I think that it's a good point. I think that ultimately, just like, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with Jokic and Murray, and sort of what they, in all likelihood, identified to the front office. But I just, frustration mounted, and I think it was a combination of things with the roster, and with Malone, I've reported, and as have other outlets, about how he kind of started to grate on his players just with his sort of demeanor and personality after a little bit. So I think there was just sort of a general frustration about, in one game it might have been this, one game it was the turnovers, another game it was the defense, another game it was probably the turnovers again. But like, I just think there was, I think there were a lot of reasons for them to be frustrated. last year. And that's like, I just think that everyone in and around the Nuggets is kind of feeling themselves right now. Like, I think the new front office is feeling themselves for good reason. They are a consensus winner of the offseason. And Christian has sort of taken up this mantle of kind of being a front-facing sort of vocal leader. He handles the media stuff really well. And is very articulate with a lot of that stuff. And, he made comments like this about himself individually last year with excuses regarding minutes and health and durability with going into the starting lineup for the first time. But, I guess now everyone sort of feels, and he specifically feels comfortable enough to transpose those sort of ideas onto the team as a whole rather than just himself individually.
Yeah, that's a really good point about Christian talking about just making that transition to starter. You go from, I forget what he was averaging the previous year, 25 minutes per game to 34 minutes per game. The defense slipped. The offense, went up like leaps and bounds. Even just, if you look at the finishing, like that alone was just such a huge leap for him last season. But another thing that Christian said, and this goes back to my previous comment about the recurring comments about the aggregate talent on the team. He said that the talent in training camp stood out. Last year, he knew he'd play a lot. Good game or bad game didn't matter. And this year, there's a lot more competition for minutes and all that kind of stuff. I don't think Christian has much to worry about with his minutes specifically, but that comment stood out more as a commentary on last season than what it tells me about how he's going to approach this season. It's just like, wow, there were so many layers to what was going wrong last season. Yeah. We've got this comment from Hurricane Teabag who says George Karl would talk about how competition can be bad when it takes away from certainty. Feels like this roster has the right balance. That's definitely something that they're going to have to, work out. Adelman this was a recurring theme for David Adelman, where he talked a lot about how when you have this many guys on the team that can provide, good minutes that can contribute, it means less opportunity for some guys, right? And there's a combination of, you gotta, even when you're on the outside, like you could be back in it at any point, so you got to stay ready, but you also have to be sort of, this is Adelman's words, selfless enough to realize like what's working for the team right now is, what's gonna go. And speaking of selflessness, maybe let's go second favorite, because I think Nuggets forever has to be up there. But my second favorite quote coming out of Media Day was from Aaron Gordon, when he was asked about, his improved shot making and how he's going to balance his perimeter offense with his traditional bully ball lob threat style. And he said, quote, "I'ma just turn up on defense. We have so much talent on the offensive side. I'm just going to focus on defense." And I absolutely love to hear that, in large part because the defense is still a really big question mark for this team for me, not just in terms of how it's going to work with the bench, but also the starters, particularly after the year that they just had. And I know that a lot of that is like effort, execution, all of the things that come with just having a really bad vibes year. And it didn't feel like anybody had taken ownership of that side of the ball. But with that comment, that's AG to me really doing that. And Christian had his own comments to that effect, also wanting to hold people accountable on defense and all of that. But it was heartening for me as a fan of the team to hear AG say I'm not thinking about my offense like whatsoever. Whether he is or not, but him saying that he's not, and then being like, I'm basically saying I'm going to be the anchor of this defense. Like that's my job. That's what I see my job as being this year.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you're evaluating where this team's defense could be this season, if you're going to be optimistic about them, making substantial improvements from 21st or 22nd, wherever it ended up last year, that a large part of it has to be internal. Like yes, Cam Johnson is an upgrade over Michael Porter Jr., but as far as the starting lineup goes, but Aaron Gordon had a down year defensively. The health had, a pretty large part in that, but the fact of the matter was that he was just not quite as locked down throughout the course of the regular season. I thought he was pretty excellent in the playoffs for the most part, but which just sort of goes to show the toughness, I guess, because he was still dealing with injuries in the playoffs. But you have that. You have Christian Braun sort of going through the growing pains of being a lead defensive guard. So you have to count on Christian Braun continuing to improve. You have to count on Aaron Gordon sort of returning to form to a certain extent. You have to count on whatever schematic variety ends up getting, input by Adelman and Jared Dudley, making some sort of impact on the team's defensive durability and enthusiasm and all of that stuff. I'm sure it will, just having more stuff that you're going to than staying pretty largely in their base scheme during the regular season can just sort of be engaging. And for a team with a high IQ collectively, I think that will be something that sort of gets guys up. But yeah, it's not like they added a guy who's an all defensive team caliber player. So you could also easily make the case that this team is not going to improve much defensively. So to hear internally from one of the guys who has to be better say that is his, not sole focus, but a very large focus, I think probably should be pretty highly encouraging for most fans.
Yeah. We touched a little bit already on David Adelman's comments on, the depth and how it's going to require both, a competitive spirit individually from all these players, but also an unselfishness. One of the other comments that stood out to me in reference to the defense is, quote, "I'm a big proponent of zone when you can't play man sometimes," which is a comment both on just like a matchup scenario, but also sometimes you're like, I gotta hide this guy, like he can't guard anybody. He said, "We happen to have a very high IQ team." This was in regard to Denver's ability to change up defenses, as you're referring to. It's like sometimes the reason you stay in your base scheme is because you at least know everybody will know what their job is on a given possession when you're doing that, as opposed to changing things up throughout a game, throughout a series, etc. But I wanted to just touch on a couple comments that he had about some of the new players before we let you go, Bennett. The first was about Cam Johnson, which I think really stood out. He was asked about acquiring Cam Johnson as a, quote, solid player. And DA immediately interjected, more than solid, right? Called him a high IQ basketball player, referred to him as another ball handler. And he did that again today in practice media when talking about the way that the players were practicing pressuring everybody full court, and how that was good practice for those guys who were pressuring defensively, but also good practice for the lead ball handlers, as he referred to them on the team, having to go up against that pressure. And he listed Cam as one of those guys. But then was also very quick to shout out MPJ and, talked about how the MPJ trade, was good for us financially, but that they don't want a title without him. And then made I thought a pretty funny quip about, the value of what he's giving to social media these days. But back to Cam again, he did reference Cam as a potential candidate for the lone starter that could stagger with the bench, which I thought was interesting from a couple of layers. One, we're still talking about just one starter staggering, which is an interesting, that's the framework that he's working within, at least as he is presenting it on media day. And two, obviously the possibility of at least to start the year, or, they're going to try some things out, having that lone starter not be Jamal Murray in those minutes without Jokic. Were you surprised that he was so forthcoming about that possibility?
No, I wasn't actually. Even back in Vegas, the first time that I talked to Adelman just a little bit about the Cam Johnson acquisition at Summer League, he brought up sort of the possibility of being able to do some second side pick and roll with him, that sort of stuff. So clearly Adelman believes in Cam Johnson as a creator. And, he alluded to the fact that Johnson's time in Brooklyn is pretty advantageous to Denver just because he was, not dribbling the ball more than 2 or 3 times per touch in Phoenix, and ended up sort of being forced into dribbling the ball more in Brooklyn. And that kind of prepared him for maybe a more versatile role with the Nuggets. So it doesn't surprise me to hear him say that, just because if you can, it just makes him easier to stagger than Porter was. Like the ability to get downhill, to run pick and roll, to create a little bit off the bounce. And, having that option sort of subsequently gives you the option to change Jamal Murray's minutes to Jokic's minutes a little bit more. And obviously, like, when they're as potent as they are together, that's not such a bad thing. I expect that they'll try to stagger Jamal Murray plenty with the second unit too. I also sort of like the fit for Murray and Valunciunas together. So
yeah, same. Just like
I don't.
By the time we finally have maybe like the best pairing for Jamal on the bench from that center position that he's had in years, and then we yank him away right when. Yeah.
But I just think that they've got into a mode in the past where they felt stuck, and like it had to be Murray playing with that unit, because Porter just wasn't reliable enough possession by possession as a ball handler, and creating for himself and teammates. And, it just didn't make.
They're just bad minutes. They were just like really bad minutes. Almost no matter what. They went from bad to worse with some of the other changes, for sure. That was a big thing that we monitored, throughout the season last year. It's interesting because we talk about this on the show a lot. The non-Jokic minutes actually were terrible last year, but if you looked at like Jamal plus DJ, they were like -2 net, as opposed to like -10. So I'm more hopeful in that. And they weren't even that great offensively. They were just like slightly below average, which is like, I'll take a slightly below average bench at this point, right?
Yeah. No, exactly. So I think that, I don't think that Adelman was saying, put it in Sharpie, Cam Johnson is the stagger and the only stagger. But I think that he is excited about the optionality that he has there, with, in all likelihood, the team's third best offensive player being someone who can actually carry water a little bit more with that type of unit, as opposed to Porter as their third best offensive player being better in a complementary setting. So, I think that's kind of what it came down to. I also thought, Cam Johnson wasn't exactly the highlight of media day or anything. He had already been introduced at his own press conference earlier in the offseason, but his comments about sort of the games played goal was interesting, saying that the 57 was unfortunate. He said some of it was circumstantial. I wonder if there's a little bit of a subtext that the
Yeah, I was like, when
is a tanking team.
he first started that answer, I was like, how in detail are you going to go here? And then he just kind of left it vague, but I kind of got where he was coming from with like, yeah, I hurt my ankle and then I was out for a month.
Exactly.
And it's like, maybe I wouldn't have been out for a month if I were on a different team at that point. But he did say his goal is 77 plus games, or to at least exceed that 75 mark. You know, he said, I want to play all 82, but I want to give myself some like wiggle room, which I thought I actually liked hearing. I liked hearing the 77. That made me feel better than the 82. To be honest, I'm like, oh, okay, that's like a concrete, like very specific.
If his goal was actually 82, then I think he would be in opposition to David Adelman, because I think Adelman's goal is going to be to not play guys 82 games if possible.
Adelman talked a little bit about the Twin Towers look, and he just kind of it sounded more like almost a morbid curiosity of like, I just want to see how other teams will guard them. He just wants to see what that would look like, and I kind of do too. Called Jonas a good offensive rebound and DHO guy, said he can play well on the second side, and he wants to see how he can use Jonas in ways that Jonas may not have been allowed to play before, which when you're serving as Jokic's backup and trying to at least pseudo replicate that system, that's definitely a thing that most centers don't get to do, even when they were starters on their prior teams. So that could be, fun for him. Let me see here. I wanted to get to one of our mailbag questions before we let you go. But that was basically that was the gist of Media Day, was the main dudes, the starters, minus Cam, but Cam, had his like you said, he had his introductory presser already. And then Adelman. We got some good vibey stuff from Bruce and Tim Hardaway Jr. We got some great comments out of Jonas. I think he said, I'm here. I'm happy to be here. There was a lot of emphasis from him, especially on doing whatever it takes to help the team win as much as possible, try to get to a championship. Talked about how individuals don't win, teams win. You could take it also as like, these are platitudes. He's a professional. He's done lots of media days before, and that's totally fine too. But it doesn't seem like, even if he is unhappy in Denver, and I really appreciated your attempt to clarify, like, were you uncomfortable? If so, like, what got you to a place of like being comfortable now, if you are comfortable now, et cetera, that kind of thing. And he was very like, I'm going to deflect as much as possible here, while also feeding some like, here's some positive stuff. I am here. I do want to work. I do want to work towards winning and all of that. And for now, I think that's about all that we're going to get out of him. I will say the fluff content from Nuggets social that came out today of Jokic playing around with Val was, I thought, pretty like adorable, and maybe that will ease Valunciunas' transition to Denver as well. All right, so I just want to throw one mailbag question at you. This is from Poppin. I asked this on YouTube. I want to ask a question, but I feel like we didn't really learn that much. Most of the things that were said, we already expected to some degree. I agree with that, Poppin. The only thing that really surprised me is how high the expectations are and how excited everyone is compared to last season. Bennett, you've already given your thoughts on like how different is the media day sentiment, this like in the room sentiment actually that different from last year because it's media day. The question though is the Nuggets roster really that strong? General consensus seems to be that OKC is still stronger, and that the Nuggets still have holes. And I guess that the answer kind of depends on how you define that strong, right? So I'll throw that one to you.
Well, that's a question that you could take in a whole lot of different ways, I guess. I think so is kind of the dumb, simple answer. I think they're pretty great on paper, but like, I think the reason that they're leaving that 15th roster spot open is because they're fully aware of the fact that, you know, they don't want to drink their own Kool-Aid too much. Maybe Bruce Brown sort of looks a little uneven like he has the last couple of years since Denver, and has been dealing with injuries and everything. Like maybe it's not immediately seamless with him. Maybe Hardaway is just not a guy who ends up playing that much. Maybe the development doesn't go well with Watson or Strother or Pickett or, you know, any of these young guys. Like there are maybe guys get hurt. There are plenty of scenarios where they're not as deep as it's easy to speculate that they are. And, you know, like I sort of laid out earlier, you could pretty reasonably make the case that their defense won't be that much better. You know, I think they're probably going to have more than enough shooting at this point, but maybe there are still some issues there with some spacing. And when there's sort of any number of issues that could pop up, it's better to have the 15th spot open to know how to address it then, rather than guess how you're going to want to address it right now. So I'm perfectly open to the idea that maybe they're not quite as elite as sort of the off-season talking season would have you believe, but you know, it's in the eye of the beholder, I guess. To a certain extent, you just run out of things to say about how good or maybe overrated they could.
Right. It's like,
and we'll just see.
Maybe it's really all about like talking about it, but as DA and other guys have said, you know, don't talk about it, be about it. Like at some point, we just got to see them actually get on the floor and, you know, see how everything fits together. Bennett, we really, really appreciate you coming on the show today. Is there anything that is in the works right now that you want to plug before we sign off?
I could tease one or two things, but I won't. Just you should read denverpost.com, subscribe to the Denver Post. Please support your local newspaper if you live in Denver, or your not local newspaper if you live elsewhere.
My not local paper.
I think there's going to be a lot of exciting stuff just from a storytelling standpoint with the Nuggets this year, because they have a very interesting locker room. Obviously, a lot of new personnel inherently makes for new stories, new ideas. I think a lot of the guys that they brought in are...
I think they had an interesting locker room last year, too.
That's true. They did have an interesting locker room. That's, you know, ambivalent word, interesting, I guess. But I think they have a lot of guys who are, you know, pretty highly respected just in terms of like how they handle themselves professionally and everything. I know that there was probably like a bad first impression with Valunciunas from sort of the story / non-story after the trade in July. But like even him, I remember my first full season on the beat going to New Orleans and talking to him for several minutes for a story about Nikola Jokic's scratches on his arms. And Valunciunas, you know, like objectively kind of stupid questions that I'm asking him. And he very much entertained it and sort of had fun with the topic, as goofy as it was. So I you know, he's pretty well regarded just for, you know, the way he handles himself and all that stuff. And I think that probably goes back into sort of how he handled media day. So anyway, I just think it's going to be an interesting locker room, and it should be a pretty likable team, I think, for most fans.
I hope so. They were substantially less likable last year. You love them, but you hate them also. If you made it this far, we appreciate you. Yes. If you made it this far in the stream, we appreciate you guys the most, but we'd appreciate you even more if you remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Leave us a review on your podcast platforms as well. Recommend us to your friends, recommend us to your family. Follow us on socials. All our links are in the description. And always remember that winning is fun and losing sucks, especially winning media day. He might have muted himself. Will, are you there?
Muted.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, sorry. I was just waiting to end this stream. Sorry, but yeah, that was
Okay, yeah,
great.
no
Thank